A homeless girl approaches a cop, clutching a tattered drawing, and calls him Daddy. Confused and denying her claim, he can't help but notice her disheveled state and the desperate hope in her eyes. As he tries to help, the girl reveals a shocking detail about her past that leaves him questioning everything. Is she really his daughter? Or is there an even deeper connection buried in his own forgotten history? With a heart-stopping twist and an emotional mystery, this chance encounter will change both their lives forever. But when the truth is finally uncovered, will it bring them closer or tear them apart? Who is this little girl, and what secret from the past could shatter his world? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban streets as Officer Daniel Grayson drove his patrol car at a leisurely pace. The familiar houses with their neat lawns and decorated porches had become such a routine sight that he barely noticed them anymore. Each day blended into the next, an endless cycle of solitary patrols and peaceful neighborhoods that left him feeling oddly empty. Daniel pulled into his usual spot outside the Corner Cup coffee shop, his daily ritual as predictable as the sunrise. The bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door, the warm aroma of coffee and freshly baked muffins wrapping around him like a comfortable blanket. "The usual, Officer Grayson?" Sarah, the barista, called out with a friendly smile. "You know me too well," he replied, managing a small smile in return. As he waited for his black coffee, Daniel's mind wandered to the stack of paperwork waiting at the station. Another quiet day. Another. "Daddy." The high-pitched voice cut through his thoughts like a bolt of lightning. Daniel turned, startled, to find a small black girl, no more than 5 years old, staring up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Her curly hair was slightly unkempt, and her pink dress showed signs of wear. In her tiny hands, she clutched a crumpled piece of paper covered in crayon drawings. "I found you," she exclaimed, reaching for his hand with complete trust. "I knew you'd come back." Daniel felt his throat tighten as he gently pulled his hand away. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I'm not your daddy," he said softly, noticing how her bright smile began to fade. "Are you here alone?" The girl, who would later introduce herself as Ava, hugged her drawing closer to her chest. "But you look just like the picture," she insisted, holding up her artwork. The crayon drawing showed a police officer with a big smile, standing next to what appeared to be a little girl. Daniel knelt down to her level, his coffee forgotten on the counter. Up close, he could see the slight tremor in her lower lip, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, and the way her shoes were scuffed and untied. His training kicked in, but something else stirred in his chest, something that went beyond his duty as an officer. "That's a beautiful drawing," he said gently. "My name is Officer Grayson. Can you tell me your name?" "Ava," she whispered, her initial excitement dimming but not disappearing entirely. "Are you sure you're not my daddy? Mommy said he was a police officer, and you're so nice, just like in my dreams." The hope in her voice made Daniel's heart ache. He'd seen countless cases of lost or abandoned children during his years on the force, but something about Ava's innocent trust and creative spirit touched him deeply. Her words stirred memories of his own childhood questions about family and belonging. "I'm not your daddy, Ava," he repeated gently, "but I would very much like to help you. Are you here by yourself? Where's your mommy?" Ava's lower lip trembled slightly, but she stood straight and proud, just like the little girl in her drawing. "Mommy had to go away for a little while," she said, her voice small but brave. "She said to wait here, that it would be safe." Daniel felt his protective instincts surge as he took in her disheveled appearance and brave facade. The coffee shop had become silent, with other customers watching the scene unfold with concerned expressions. Daniel guided Ava through the bustling police precinct, her small hand wrapped trustingly in his. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floors as officers and civilians moved about their daily business. Ava stayed close to his side, her precious drawing still clutched tightly in her other hand. "Let's get you something to drink first," Daniel said, leading her to the break room. He poured her a cup of apple juice from the vending machine, watching as she sipped it carefully, her eyes taking in every detail of her surroundings. Officer Rachel Collins leaned against the doorframe, a knowing smirk playing across her face. "Well, well, Grayson. Didn't know you were hiding a kid from us all this time." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. "She's not mine, Collins. I found her at the corner cup. We need to file a missing persons report for her mother." Rachel's eyebrows shot up as she studied Ava more closely. "You sure about that? Because word's already spreading around the precinct. Martinez swears she has your eyes." "That's ridiculous," Daniel muttered, but he could feel the weight of curious stares from passing colleagues. Some whispered behind their hands, others openly pointed. His usually comfortable workplace suddenly felt suffocating. Ava tugged on his sleeve, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension. "Officer Grayson, can I show you something?" She smoothed out her drawing on the break room table, revealing more details Daniel hadn't noticed before. The police officer in the picture wore a badge with a number, his badge number. "Mommy said I would find my daddy here," Ava explained, her finger tracing the crayon lines. "She showed me pictures of the building and told me to look for an officer with this number." She pointed to Daniel's badge, then back to her drawing. "She said he would know what to do." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face as Rachel let out a low whistle. "Well, this just got interesting," she said, pushing off from the doorframe. "I'll leave you two to figure this out." "Collins, wait!" Daniel called after her, but she was already gone, no doubt spreading this new development through the precinct's gossip pipeline. Ava looked up at him with those trusting eyes. "Mommy's name is Celeste. She cried a lot before she left. She said she was sorry, but that I would be safer here." Daniel pulled up a chair next to Ava, trying to maintain his professional composure despite the churning in his stomach. "Ava, when did your mommy leave you at the coffee shop?" "This morning. She bought me a hot chocolate and gave me this drawing." Ava's lower lip trembled slightly. "She hugged me really tight and said she loved me more than anything in the whole world." The precinct's usual background noise seemed to fade away as Daniel processed this information. Somewhere out there, a woman named Celeste had deliberately led her daughter to him, using his badge number as a guide. But why? And how did she even know his badge number in the first place? Whispers and pointed looks continued from his colleagues as they passed by the break room window. Daniel could already imagine the rumors flying through the building. The straight-laced Officer Grayson with a secret child, a mysterious woman from his past suddenly reappearing. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, feeling the weight of speculation pressing in from all sides. "Officer Grayson?" Ava's small voice pulled him back to the present. "Are you mad at me?" Daniel's heart softened at her worried expression. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you at all. We're going to figure this out together, okay?" Daniel pulled up to a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town, its faded brick walls and rusty fire escapes telling stories of better days. Ava sat quietly in the back seat, her small fingers still clutching the drawing she refused to let go. "Is this where you lived, sweetie?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice gentle and reassuring. Ava nodded, pressing her face against the window. "Apartment 3B, Mommy's flowers are gone." Daniel noticed the empty window boxes on the third floor, dead stems poked out of dry soil, abandoned like everything else. His heart squeezed painfully in his chest as he helped Ava out of the car. The building manager, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, barely looked up from her magazine when Daniel showed his badge. "Yeah, they left about 2 weeks ago. No forwarding address. Rent was always late anyway." While Daniel asked more questions, Ava wandered around the small office, studying the bulletin board covered in community notices. "You had a doggy named Scout," she said suddenly, her voice clear and innocent. Daniel froze mid-sentence. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He'd never mentioned Scout, his childhood dog from the foster home, to anyone at the precinct, let alone to Ava. "What did you say?" he asked, his throat suddenly dry. "A brown doggy with a white spot." Ava continued drawing invisible patterns on the dusty desk with her finger. "You used to sneak him treats under the dinner table." The building manager raised an eyebrow, but Daniel barely noticed. His mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. How could this little girl know about Scout, about one of his few happy memories from his time in foster care? Back at the precinct, Daniel sat at his desk staring at his computer screen. Ava had fallen asleep on the small couch in the break room, her drawing still clutched tightly in her small hands. The gentle rhythm of her breathing provided a stark contrast to the chaos in Daniel's mind. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he finally typed in his access codes to the foster care database. He hadn't looked at these records in years, had tried to leave that part of his life behind. But now, the files loaded slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. Daniel scrolled through years of placements, case notes, and transfer records until a familiar name caught his eye. His breath caught in his throat. Celeste Williams, age 12, had arrived at the same group home where he'd stayed, just months after he'd been adopted, the same home where Scout had lived, where he'd spent countless nights sneaking treats to a friendly brown dog with a white spot on his chest. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. But there it was in black and white. Celeste had lived in the same places he had, walked the same halls, probably heard stories about the boy who'd finally found a forever home. He glanced at Ava's sleeping form through the break room window. Her small face was peaceful, unaware of the earth-shattering discoveries being made just a few feet away. The drawing in her hands fluttered slightly with each breath, and Daniel wondered what other secrets this little girl might be holding, what other impossible things she might know about a past he'd tried so hard to forget. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the phone to his ear, listening to his adoptive mother's shaky voice. Ava was in the next room, happily coloring at his kitchen table, but his world was spinning out of control. We should have told you sooner, Danny," Margaret Grayson said, her voice thick with emotion. "We thought we were protecting you." "Protecting me?" Daniel's voice cracked. He paced his living room, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "By hiding that I had a sister?" His father, Robert, joined the conversation. "Son, your biological mother was in a bad place. When she had Celeste years later, the situation wasn't any better. We wanted to spare you from that pain." Daniel sank onto his couch, the weight of this revelation crushing his chest. All those years of wondering about his biological family, of feeling alone, and the answer had been so close. Celeste had been in the same foster system, walking the same halls he once did. "She's Ava's mother," Daniel said quietly. "That makes Ava your niece," Margaret finished, her voice gentle. "We only pieced it together when you called us about her. The timing, the names." Daniel glanced toward the kitchen where Ava's quiet humming drifted through the apartment. His niece. The word felt foreign, yet somehow right. "I have to find her," he said firmly. "I have to find Celeste." "And if you can't?" Robert asked carefully. "Daniel, are you prepared for what that might mean?" The question hit him hard. Was he ready to be responsible for a child? To possibly become Ava's guardian if Celeste couldn't be found or wasn't fit to care for her? His ordered, solitary life would be turned upside down. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't abandon her, not like—" He left the sentence unfinished, the old wound of his biological mother's abandonment still tender after all these years. After ending the call, Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway watching Ava. She was completely absorbed in her drawing, her small tongue poking out in concentration. Something warm stirred in his chest, melting the edges of his usually guarded heart. "Hungry, kiddo?" he asked, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. Ava looked up, her face brightening. "Can we have pizza?" "Sure thing." Daniel found himself smiling despite the emotional turmoil inside. "Want to help me order?" While they waited for the delivery, Daniel helped Ava set up the guest room. She bounced on the bed, giggling as she arranged the extra pillows he'd found. "Officer Danny?" she asked, suddenly serious. "Are you sad?" Daniel paused in the middle of laying out a spare blanket. "What makes you think that? Your eyes look like Mommy's when she's sad." Ava climbed off the bed and wrapped her small arms around his waist, hugging him tight. "Don't be sad. I'll share my crayons with you." Daniel felt his throat tighten as he knelt down to her level. This little girl, his niece, had somehow slipped past all his defenses in just one day. She reached up and patted his cheek with her small hand, leaving a slight smudge of crayon. "Thank you, Ava," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "That's very kind of you." Daniel sat in Mrs. Peterson's floral print living room, his police notebook open on his lap. The elderly woman had fostered Celeste for nearly 2 years during her teens, longer than most placements. Such a troubled soul, Mrs. Peterson sighed, adjusting her glasses. Celeste had such potential, but life kept knocking her down. She'd write poetry, beautiful stuff. But the system... She shook her head sadly. It failed her, just like it failed so many others. Daniel's pen hovered over the paper. Did she ever mention having a brother? Once or twice, said she had one somewhere out there but didn't know much else. Mrs. Peterson leaned forward, her eyes kind. "You look like her, you know. Around the eyes." The observation hit Daniel hard. He'd spent the morning visiting 3 other former foster parents, each painting a similar picture of his sister, a bright girl who never caught the breaks she needed. "What about more recently?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Before she disappeared with Ava?" Mrs. Peterson's face darkened. "That man she was with, Marcus, bad news from the start. I warned her, but..." She wrung her weathered hands. "Last time I saw her, she had bruises she tried to hide with makeup. Ava was with her, such a precious little thing. I offered to help, but Celeste was always too proud." Back in his car, Daniel called the precinct to run a background check on Marcus Thompson. The preliminary results made his stomach turn. Multiple domestic violence complaints, all eventually dropped. At his next stop, Daniel interviewed Celeste's former neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived in the run-down apartment complex they'd fled from. "She worked 3 jobs," Mrs. Rodriguez said, bouncing her own toddler on her knee. "Cleaning houses, waiting tables, anything to keep food on the table. But that boyfriend of hers," she made a disgusted sound. "He'd take her money, show up drunk. Poor Ava would come stay with me when things got bad." Daniel's protective instincts flared. The image of his niece hiding from violence made his hands clench into fists. When he returned home that evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, he found Ava at her usual spot at the kitchen table. Colorful drawings were spread out before her. "Look what I made," she exclaimed, holding up her latest masterpiece. Daniel's heart caught in his throat. The crayon drawing showed 3 figures: a small girl with curly hair, a woman he assumed was Celeste, and a tall figure in a police uniform. Above them, in wobbly letters, she'd written, "My family." "That's you," Ava pointed proudly at the police officer. "You're my new daddy now." Daniel knelt beside her chair, struggling to find the right words. "Ava, sweetheart, I'm not... See? I gave you a badge, just like your real one." She traced the golden circle on the figure's chest with her finger. "And look, we're all holding hands and smiling." The pure hope in her voice made his chest ache. He looked at the other drawings scattered across the table, all variations of the same theme. In each one, he featured prominently as a father figure, sometimes pushing her on a swing, other times reading her a story. "Do you like them?" Ava asked, her big brown eyes searching his face anxiously. Daniel gently picked up one of the drawings where Crayon Daniel was carrying Ava on his shoulders. "They're beautiful," he said softly, his throat tight with emotion. "Can I keep this one?" Ava beamed, nodding enthusiastically. "I'll make you lots more. Can we put them on the fridge?" "Of course we can," Daniel replied, his heart growing fuller and heavier at the same time. As he helped Ava arrange her artwork on the refrigerator door, he wondered how he could possibly explain the truth to her, that he wasn't her father but an uncle she never knew she had. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's grocery store cast harsh shadows as Daniel walked the aisles, pushing a shopping cart with Ava perched in the child seat. She clutched her favorite stuffed bear, chattering about what kind of cookies they should buy. Can we get the ones with chocolate chips? Ava asked, pointing excitedly at the cookie display. Before Daniel could answer, a commotion erupted near the front of the store. "Stop! Security!" a voice called out. Daniel's police instincts kicked in immediately. He quickly lifted Ava from the cart, holding her close as he moved toward the disturbance. A woman in a worn denim jacket was trying to push past the store security guard, her oversized bag spilling cans of food onto the floor. Time seemed to freeze as Daniel recognized her face. It was the same face Mrs. Peterson had said looked like his around the eyes. Celeste. "Mommy!" Ava cried out, squirming in Daniel's arms. Celeste's head snapped up at her daughter's voice. Her eyes widened with recognition, first at Ava, then settling on Daniel's face. The color drained from her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just needed food. I couldn't—" Her words trailed off as she stared at Daniel, confusion and fear mixing in her expression. Daniel felt torn between his duty as a police officer and the surge of complicated emotions rushing through him. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Grayson," he said formally, though his voice trembled slightly. "You need to come with me." "You're the cop who has my baby," Celeste said, her eyes filling with tears. "Why do you look like—" She stopped, realization dawning on her face. "No, it can't be." "I'm your brother," Daniel said quietly, still holding Ava protectively. "We were in the foster system together. Different homes." Celeste's knees buckled, and the security guard had to steady her. "Brother? I never knew. They never told me." Her voice cracked with emotion. "Is that why you've been taking care of Ava? Because you knew?" "I only found out recently," Daniel admitted. "But Celeste, you abandoned her. Left her alone to find me." "I didn't abandon her," Celeste protested, tears streaming down her face. "I was trying to protect her from Marcus. He threatened to hurt her if I didn't give him money. I had to get away, had to keep her safe." She looked desperately at Ava. "Baby, Mommy loves you so much, I'm so sorry." Ava buried her face in Daniel's shoulder, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. Daniel could feel her small body trembling. "I have to arrest you," Daniel said, his professional facade cracking. "The store is pressing charges." "I understand," Celeste whispered, holding out her wrists. As Daniel reluctantly handed her over to the responding patrol officers, she called out, "Please take care of her. She needs someone strong, someone good. Maybe that's why she found you." As the officers led Celeste away in handcuffs, Ava began to cry softly. "Is Mommy in trouble?" she asked between hiccups. Daniel hugged her tighter, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "Yes, sweetheart. But we're going to help her, okay? That's what family does." "Are you still my daddy?" Ava asked in a small voice, clutching his uniform. Daniel's heart clenched painfully. He watched as his sister, this stranger who shared his blood, was placed in the back of a patrol car. The weight of Ava in his arms felt both heavier and more precious than ever. "I'm your uncle," he said gently, stroking her hair. "But I promise I'll always be here for you, no matter what." The drive home was silent except for Ava's occasional sniffles from the back seat. Daniel kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his heart aching at her tear-stained face. The events at the grocery store had shaken them both. Once inside his apartment, Ava stood in the middle of the living room, looking lost and small. Her stuffed bear dangled from one hand while she clutched her drawing in the other. "Why did they take Mommy away?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did she do something bad?" Daniel knelt down to her level, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes good people make mistakes when they're scared or desperate," he explained softly. "Your mom was trying to get food because she didn't have money to buy it." Ava's lower lip quivered. "But why didn't she just ask for help? You help people. That's what police officers do, right?" The innocent question hit Daniel hard. Yes, we do. But sometimes people are too afraid to ask for help, even from family they didn't know they had. "Are you really my uncle?" Ava asked, moving closer to him. "Like for real?" Yes, sweetheart, your mom and I, we're brother and sister. We just didn't know about each other until now. Ava's brow furrowed in concentration. So that means we're family? Real family? Yes, we are. She wrapped her small arms around his neck, surprising him with the force of her hug. I knew you were my family. I could feel it in here. She patted her chest. Daniel had to clear his throat past the sudden lump of emotion. How about we get you ready for bed? It's been a long day. After helping Ava change into her pajamas and tucking her in with her bear, Daniel watched as she carefully smoothed out her drawing on the bedside table. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall with a police uniform, one medium-sized with curly hair, and one small figure between them. That's you and Mommy and me, Ava explained sleepily. We're all together and happy. Daniel waited until her breathing evened out before stepping into the hallway. He pulled out his phone and dialed Captain Morgan's number, knowing this couldn't wait until morning. Captain, it's Grayson. I apologize for calling so late, but there's been a development in the situation with Ava. What kind of development? Morgan's gruff voice came through the speaker. Daniel explained everything, discovering Celeste was his sister, the arrest at the grocery store, and his growing concern about the conflict of interest. Grayson, Morgan's tone was stern. You know we can't have personal relationships clouding our judgment. This could compromise the entire case. I understand, sir, but no buts. You're too close to this now. I'm assigning the case to Martinez tomorrow morning. Daniel paced his living room, running a hand through his hair in frustration. With all due respect, sir, Ava trusts me. She needs stability right now. And what about Celeste? Can you honestly say you'll remain objective when handling her case? She's your sister, for Christ's sake. The question stopped Daniel in his tracks. He glanced toward the spare bedroom where Ava slept, her drawing visible through the partially open door. I don't know, he admitted quietly, but I know I can't abandon either of them now. There has to be a way to help them while still doing my job. Morgan sighed heavily. Look, Daniel, I know you're a good cop, but this situation, it's complicated. Sleep on it. We'll talk more tomorrow. After hanging up, Daniel stood in Ava's doorway, watching her peaceful sleep. The moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating her drawing on the table. His chest tightened as he looked at those 3 simple stick figures, holding hands in Ava's imagined perfect world. He had sworn an oath to serve and protect, but now he wondered, what did that mean when it came to protecting his newfound family? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Daniel made his way through the police station's holding area. His footsteps echoed against the cold tile floor, each step bringing him closer to the woman who had suddenly become more than just another case. Celeste sat hunched on the metal bench in her cell, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she looked up at Daniel's approach, her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. I didn't expect you to come, she said softly. Daniel pulled up a chair, settling himself outside the bars. We need to talk about what happened. All of it. Celeste's shoulders tensed. I know what you must think of me. A thief. A bad mother. I'm not here to judge you, Daniel replied, keeping his voice gentle. I just want to understand. She took a shaky breath, running her fingers through her tangled hair. His name was Marcus. At first, he seemed perfect, charming, successful. But then, her voice cracked. The first time he hit me, he cried afterward and promised it would never happen again. I believed him. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. When I got pregnant with Ava, I thought things would get better. Instead, they got worse. He started controlling everything, my money, my phone, who I could talk to. Celeste's hands trembled. The night I left, he threw a glass at my head. It missed, but Ava saw everything. She was crying, and I knew we had to get out. The fluorescent light flickered, casting shadows across Celeste's face as she lost herself in the memory. 3 weeks ago, Celeste stood in the rain, clutching Ava's small hand. They had nothing but a backpack of clothes and the cash she'd managed to hide away over months. Her daughter's favorite stuffed bear was tucked safely under her arm, "Mommy, I'm cold," Ava whispered. Celeste pulled her daughter closer, scanning the street. The police station stood across the road, its lights a beacon in the darkness. She'd done her research. Officer Daniel Grayson worked here. The brother she'd never met but had discovered through desperate late-night searches of adoption records. "Baby, remember what Mommy told you?" Celeste knelt down, her voice breaking. "About finding Daddy?" Ava nodded, clutching her drawing. "He's a police officer. He helps people." "That's right." Celeste fought back tears. "And sometimes helping means letting someone else take care of the people we love until we can do better." She hugged Ava tightly, memorizing the feel of her daughter's warmth, the smell of her hair. "I love you so much, baby girl. More than anything in this world." Back in the present, tears rolled down Celeste's cheeks. I watched from across the street until I saw her go inside. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Daniel leaned forward. "Why didn't you come to me directly?" "I was afraid," Celeste admitted. "Afraid Marcus would find us. Afraid the system would separate us forever. I thought if Ava found you first, you'd protect her. Give her the stability I couldn't." "And the shoplifting?" Celeste wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I'd been sleeping in my car, trying to find work. The money ran out and I was so hungry. I kept telling myself just one more day, just until I could figure something out." Daniel studied his sister's face, seeing echoes of their shared past in foster care, the same desperation, the same fear of abandonment. But he also saw something else, a fierce love for Ava that mirrored his own growing attachment to the little girl. Still, doubt nagged at him. Celeste's love was clear, but was love enough? Could she provide the stability Ava needed? Or would their lives continue to be shaped by fear and desperation? The Little Sunflowers Daycare Center buzzed with the happy chaos of children at play. Daniel stood in the doorway, his police uniform crisp and neat, while Ava clung to his leg. The cheerful yellow walls were covered in finger paintings and construction paper crafts. Ms. Sarah, a warm-faced teacher with kind eyes, knelt down to Ava's level. "Hi there, sweetheart. Would you like to come meet some new friends?" Ava peeked out from behind Daniel's leg, her small fingers gripping the fabric of his uniform pants. "Can Officer Daniel stay?" "Remember what we talked about?" Daniel said gently, running a hand over Ava's braided hair. "I have to go to work, but I'll be back to pick you up later." Ms. Sarah smiled encouragingly. "Look over there. Tommy and Lisa are building with blocks. Would you like to help them make a castle?" Ava's eyes lit up at the sight of the colorful wooden blocks, but she hesitated. Daniel knelt beside her, his heart aching at the fear in her eyes. "I promise I'll come back," he whispered. "Just like I promised yesterday, and the day before that." Ava nodded slowly, her lower lip trembling slightly. She reached into her tiny backpack and pulled out her ever-present drawing pad. "Can I take this with me?" "Of course you can, sweetie," Ms. Sarah answered. "We have a special art time later today, too." As Daniel watched Ava take tentative steps toward the block corner, his chest tightened. Each day got a little easier, but leaving her still felt like pulling off a bandage. Quick, but painful. Later that afternoon, during art time, Ms. Sarah gathered the children around low tables covered in paper and crayons. "Today, let's draw pictures of our families," she suggested. The other children dove right in, creating stick figures with smiling faces. Ava sat quietly, her crayon hovering over the paper. Ms. Sarah noticed her hesitation and sat beside her. "What's on your mind, Ava?" "I want to draw my family, but..." Ava's voice trailed off. "But what, sweetheart?" "Some kids have a mommy and daddy who live together. Some have two mommies or two daddies. But I have a mommy who's away and Officer Daniel who takes care of me now." Ava's lower lip quivered. "Is that okay?" Miss Sarah placed a gentle hand on Ava's shoulder. "Families come in all different shapes and sizes. The most important thing is that they love each other." Ava's face brightened. She began to draw with purpose, her small hand moving across the paper with determination. When she finished, she held up her creation proudly. The picture showed 3 figures holding hands: a tall man in blue, clearly Daniel in his uniform, a woman with curly hair, Celeste, and a small figure between them, Ava. Above them, she had drawn a big yellow sun and a rainbow. "This is my family," Ava announced. "Officer Daniel and my mommy and me. We're not all together yet, but we will be." When Daniel arrived to pick her up that afternoon, Ava ran to him with the drawing clutched in her hands. As he studied the picture, something shifted in his heart. The simple crayon drawing captured everything: Ava's hope, her resilience, her unwavering belief in the power of family. Looking at the three figures holding hands under that crayon sun, Daniel felt his reservations about long-term guardianship beginning to melt away. Maybe Ava's innocent wisdom saw something he hadn't been ready to see, that sometimes families aren't born, they're built, one careful step at a time. Daniel sat across from Ms. Martinez, Celeste's social worker, in her cramped office. Files and papers covered every surface, telling stories of countless lives touched by the system. The afternoon sun filtered through dusty blinds, casting long shadows across the desk between them. Celeste's case was challenging from the start, Ms. Martinez began, adjusting her reading glasses as she opened a thick manila folder. She entered the system at age 7 after her mother's overdose. No father in the picture. Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't known about their mother's fate. What happened after that? 8 foster homes in 11 years. Ms. Martinez's voice carried the weight of too many similar stories. Some were decent, others. She shook her head. The system was overwhelmed, still is. Celeste fell through the cracks. Like so many others, Daniel murmured, thinking of his own journey through foster care before his adoption. At 16, she started running away. By 18, she aged out with no support system, no life skills training, no real preparation for adulthood. Ms. Martinez pulled out several documents. "We tried to provide resources, but funding is always limited. Many of our youth end up homeless or in trouble within the first year." Daniel leaned forward, studying a faded photo of teenage Celeste. Her eyes held the same wariness he sometimes saw in Ava's. And then, she met James Thompson when she was 19. Seemed stable at first, had a good job, but the abuse started shortly after Ava was born. Ms. Martinez's voice hardened. Celeste tried to leave 3 times before she finally succeeded. The information hit Daniel like a physical blow. His half-sister had faced so much alone, while he'd been fortunate enough to find a loving adoptive family. "Officer Grayson," Ms. Martinez said gently, "Celeste's story isn't unique. The system sets these kids up to fail. No family support, no safety net, no one to turn to in crisis." Before Daniel could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who was watching Ava. "She's asking for you." "I need to go," Daniel said, standing. "But I'd like to learn more. Maybe understand what support Celeste needs to get back on her feet." Ms. Martinez nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking that could make a real difference. When Daniel arrived home, he found Ava curled up on his couch, clutching her favorite blanket. Mrs. Chen had braided her hair into neat rows, with little purple ribbons at the ends. "Officer Daniel!" Ava's face lit up. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "I missed you." "I missed you too, kiddo." He scooped her up, his heart warming at her delighted giggle. "Did you have fun with Mrs. Chen?" "Uh-huh. We made cookies and she taught me to count in Chinese." Ava's expression suddenly turned serious. "Officer Daniel?" "Yes?" "You make the scary feelings go away," she said simply, resting her head on his shoulder. "Like when Mommy used to sing to me. Is that okay?" Daniel's chest tightened with emotion. He thought about Celeste, alone and scared at Ava's age, with no one to make her scary feelings go away. About how different both their lives might have been if someone had stepped up sooner. "That's more than okay, sweetheart," he whispered, holding her close. "That's exactly what family is supposed to do." The word family echoed in his mind, carrying new weight after his conversation with Ms. Martinez. He looked at Ava, safe and trusting in his arms, and felt the familiar pull of responsibility warring with his uncertainty about the future. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the manila envelope from the lab. He'd been sitting in his parked car for 15 minutes, unable to open it. The afternoon sun beat down through the windshield, but he felt cold inside. Finally, he took a deep breath and broke the seal. The medical terminology swam before his eyes until he found what he was looking for. Probability of paternity, 0%. Genetic markers indicate likely avuncular relationship, uncle. His chest tightened. He'd known this was possible, probable even, after discovering Celeste was his half-sister. But seeing it in black and white made everything real in a way that knocked the wind out of him. "Officer Grayson?" A gentle tap on his window startled him. Dr. Chen, the lab technician who'd handled the testing, stood outside his car. She'd been kind throughout the process, especially when she'd noticed how his hands shook while giving the DNA sample. Daniel rolled down his window, trying to compose himself. "I was just reading the results." "Would you like to come inside? We can go through them together," she offered, her eyes full of understanding. He nodded, gathering the papers with unsteady fingers. Inside the sterile lab office, Dr. Chen sat across from him, her white coat pristine against the institutional gray walls. "The results are quite clear," she explained, pointing to various charts and numbers. "While you're not Ava's father, you share approximately 25% of your DNA with her, which is consistent with an uncle-niece relationship. This supports what you learned about being Celeste's half-brother." Daniel stared at the genetic mapping on the page. "I thought maybe there was a chance." His voice trailed off. "That you were her father?" Dr. Chen asked gently. He nodded, surprising himself with the admission. "I didn't even know I wanted that until right now." "Being an uncle is just as meaningful," Dr. Chen said softly. "Family connections aren't just about DNA percentages." Daniel thought about Ava, probably drawing pictures at daycare right now, unaware that her whole world was shifting again. "I don't know if I'm equipped for this," he confessed. Being an uncle, being responsible for her while her mother, he couldn't finish the sentence. "From what you've told me, you're already doing it," Dr. Chen pointed out. "The title doesn't change who you've been to her these past weeks." Daniel's phone buzzed, a photo from the daycare showing Ava proudly holding up a new drawing. This one showed 3 figures, a tall one in a police uniform, a smaller one with curly hair, and a medium-sized one wearing a dress. She'd labeled them Uncle Daniel, me, and Mommy. His vision blurred as he showed the phone to Dr. Chen. "She knew," he whispered. Somehow she already knew. "Children often sense these things," Dr. Chen said. "They're more intuitive than we give them credit for." Daniel tucked the test results back into their envelope, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper into his bones. He wasn't Ava's father, but he was her family, her uncle, the only stable adult in her life right now. "What happens next is up to you," Dr. Chen said, standing to signal the end of their consultation. "But remember, family comes in many forms. Sometimes the families we build are just as important as the ones we're born into." Daniel walked out of the lab into the bright afternoon sun, his mind racing with questions about his role in Ava's life, about Celeste, about the kind of family they could become. The test results had answered one question, but opened up so many more. That evening, Daniel sat in his adoptive parents' cozy living room, the familiar scent of his mother's chocolate chip cookies filling the air. Ava was coloring quietly on the floor nearby while Daniel shared the DNA test results with his parents. I don't know if I'm ready for this," Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Being an uncle, being responsible for both Ava and Celeste somehow, it's overwhelming." His mother, Margaret, reached across and squeezed his hand. Her touch was warm and reassuring, just like it had been when he was a scared foster kid in their home 25 years ago. "Daniel, sweetheart, sometimes life's biggest challenges are actually gifts in disguise." His father, Robert, nodded thoughtfully. "Remember how scared we were when we first took you in? We had no idea what we were doing. But love has a way of showing you the path." Daniel ran his fingers through his hair, a nervous habit he'd never outgrown. "But what if I mess this up? What if I can't be what Ava needs?" "You're already what she needs," Margaret said firmly. Look at how she's flourishing with you. And maybe," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "maybe helping Ava heal can help you heal too." Daniel looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Son," Robert leaned forward in his armchair, "we've watched you carry the weight of your early childhood abandonment for years. You've built walls around your heart, kept people at arm's length. But Ava, she broke through those walls without even trying. And Celeste," Margaret added gently, "she's your sister. She made mistakes, yes, but she was trying to protect her daughter the only way she knew how, just like your birth mother thought she was doing what was best for you." Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm not sure I can forgive that easily." "Nobody's asking you to forgive right away," Robert said, "but understanding might be a good place to start." They fell into a thoughtful silence, broken only by the soft scratching of Ava's crayons on paper. Daniel hadn't realized she'd been listening until her small voice piped up. "I'm glad I found you, Uncle Daniel." The simple statement hit him like a physical force. He turned to find Ava looking at him with those big, honest eyes that seemed to see right through to his soul. She'd stopped coloring and was holding her latest drawing. Another family portrait, but this time with Uncle Daniel written carefully above his figure. You're okay with me being your uncle?" Daniel asked, his voice rough with emotion. Ava nodded, climbing onto the couch next to him. "You take care of me like Mommy said family should, and you make me feel safe." She snuggled against his side, adding quietly, "Plus, you let me have chocolate milk sometimes." Margaret wiped away a tear, and Robert cleared his throat gruffly. Daniel wrapped his arm around Ava, pulling her close. In that moment, he made a silent promise to himself and to her. He would protect this little girl, help her mother heal, and try to build the kind of family that all of them deserved, even if it meant putting his career on the line. Looking at his parents' proud faces and feeling Ava's trust in the way she leaned against him, Daniel finally understood what they meant about healing. Sometimes the family you need finds you, even when you're not looking for it. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, staring at old photographs from his foster care days. Each faded image stirred memories he'd tried so hard to forget. The constant moving, the temporary families, the ache of never quite belonging. His fingers traced the edges of a group photo from the Pine Street home, where he'd spent 6 months when he was 8. "What are those pictures?" Ava asked, climbing onto the chair next to him. She was wearing the new purple dress Daniel had bought her hair neatly braided for the social worker's visit. "These are from when I was a kid like you," Daniel explained, his voice soft. "Before my mom and dad, the ones you met yesterday, adopted me, I lived in different homes with other children." Ava leaned closer, pointing to a small boy with serious eyes in the photograph. "Is that you?" "Yeah, that's me." Daniel smiled sadly. "I was pretty lonely back then. I used to dream about finding my real family, just like you did." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Ms. Thompson, the social worker, stood on the porch with her clipboard and professional smile. Daniel's shoulders tensed as he let her in. "Good morning, Officer Grayson," she said, then knelt to Ava's level. "And you must be Ava. I love your dress." Ava beamed. "Thank you. Uncle Daniel got it for me. And look, he learned how to braid my hair too." She turned to show off her neat rows of braids. Ms. Thompson's smile warmed as she made notes. She toured the apartment, checking the kitchen, bathroom, and the new bedroom Daniel had set up for Ava. The little girl eagerly showed off her artwork displayed on the walls and the stuffed animals arranged on her bed. "And what do you like to do for fun, Ava?" Ms. Thompson asked. "Uncle Daniel takes me to the park and we read stories and sometimes we bake cookies, but he's not very good at it yet." Ava giggled. Daniel stood rigid in the doorway, his jaw tight. When Ms. Thompson asked about his work schedule and childcare arrangements, his answers came out clipped and defensive. After the inspection, Ms. Thompson pulled Daniel aside. "Officer Grayson, Ava seems very happy here, but I sense you're struggling with this transition. Are you sure you're prepared for this responsibility?" "I'm doing my best," Daniel replied stiffly. After Ms. Thompson left, Daniel found Ava looking at the foster care photos again. She touched one showing a Christmas morning where young Daniel sat alone, while other children opened presents with their foster parents. "Were you sad?" she asked quietly. Daniel sat beside her, his guard finally dropping. "Yeah, I was. Sometimes I felt like nobody wanted me. But then I found my forever family, just like you found me." "Did you miss your first mommy?" "I did," Daniel admitted, his voice cracking. "I still do sometimes. That's why I understand how much you miss your mom, Celeste, and why she did everything she could to protect you, even when it was hard." Ava climbed into his lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "You protect me now, too." Daniel held her close, feeling the walls around his heart crumbling. "That's right, sweetheart, and you know what? Helping you, it's helping me too. Making me remember what it felt like to need someone to care." They sat together looking through the old photographs, sharing stories of their parallel journeys through loneliness to finding each other. For the first time, Daniel truly understood Celeste's desperate choices. The same system that had left him scarred had shaped her too. The detention center's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Celeste's face as Daniel sat across from her at the metal visitation table. Her orange jumpsuit made her look smaller, more vulnerable than the defiant woman he'd arrested at the grocery store. "How's Ava?" Celeste asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers fidgeted with the sleeve of her jumpsuit. "She's doing okay. She misses you." Daniel watched as tears welled up in Celeste's eyes. "She drew another picture yesterday, of all of us together." Celeste's composure cracked. Her shoulders shook as she covered her face with her hands. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I had to keep her safe." Daniel leaned forward, his police training warring with his growing connection to this woman, his sister. "Tell me about him. About why you ran." Celeste took a shuddering breath, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Marcus seemed nice at first, charming. He helped me get an apartment, bought things for Ava. But then he started drinking more, getting angry over little things." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a faded scar. "The first time he hit me, Ava was asleep in the next room. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. But it got worse. He started saying things about Ava, how she was too loud, too messy. The way he looked at her." Celeste's voice broke. "One night he came home drunk, angrier than usual. He grabbed Ava's arm so hard it left bruises. That's when I knew we had to leave. I packed what I could while he was passed out and we just ran." Daniel's fists clenched under the table. His police instincts kicked in, wanting details, dates, locations. But he forced himself to stay quiet, to just listen. "We moved around a lot. I tried to find work but without references or a permanent address." Celeste wiped fresh tears away. "The money ran out. Ava was getting skinnier. I couldn't even afford proper food. And Marcus, he kept finding us. Every time we'd start to feel safe, he'd show up." She looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "When I learned about you, about where you worked, it felt like a sign. I thought if I could just get Ava to you, you could protect her in ways I couldn't. Give her the life she deserves." "Why didn't you come to me directly?" Daniel asked softly. "I was ashamed and scared. Marcus has friends in law enforcement in other cities. I didn't know if I could trust anyone, but I watched you for weeks before I left Ava there. I saw how you were with people, how you helped that lost kid find his mom, how you bought coffee for the homeless man outside the shop." Daniel sat back, processing everything. The pieces of Celeste's desperate choices were finally falling into place. "Please," Celeste pleaded, reaching across the table but stopping short of touching him. "I know I messed up, but everything I did, it was for her. I'll do anything to make this right. Take parenting classes, counseling, whatever it takes. I just want another chance to be her mother." Daniel stood up, his decision made. "I'll talk to the captain. There are programs for situations like this. We can get you help." But when he presented his case to Captain Morgan later that day, the response was immediate and firm. You're too close to this, Grayson, Morgan warned, leaning back in his chair. This woman abandoned her child and got caught stealing. Your personal connection is clouding your judgment. She was protecting her daughter from an abusive situation, Daniel argued. She needs help, not punishment. And what happens when your advocacy affects your credibility as an officer? When defense attorneys start questioning your objectivity? Morgan shook his head. Let the system handle this one, Daniel. Don't risk your career over it. Daniel stood his ground, thinking of Ava's drawings of Celeste's tears, of his own childhood wounds. With all due respect, sir, sometimes the system needs a reminder about the people it's supposed to protect. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees at Harrison Park as Daniel watched Ava climb the playground equipment. Her pink sneakers, newly bought last weekend, flashed as she scrambled up the ladder. The past few weeks had left little time for play, and seeing her smile made his heart lighter. Be careful up there, he called out, his police instincts never quite turning off. I will. Ava's gap-toothed grin beamed down at him. She had lost her first tooth yesterday, and the tooth fairy's visit had been a bright spot in their complicated situation. A little boy about Ava's age approached the playground, his mother hovering nearby with a watchful eye. The boy wore a Spider-Man t-shirt that caught Ava's attention immediately. I like Spider-Man too, Ava called out to him. Want to play superheroes? The boy, shy at first, nodded eagerly. I'm Tommy, he said, climbing up to join her. I'm Ava. This is my Uncle Daniel down there. She pointed proudly at Daniel, who waved to Tommy's mother with a reassuring smile. Daniel settled onto a nearby bench, pulling out his phone to review the notes he'd taken about rehabilitation programs. The words blurred together. Family reunification, substance abuse counseling, domestic violence survivor support. He'd spent his lunch breaks researching options, determined to help Celeste build a stable life. Uncle Daniel, Ava's voice pulled him from his research. Tommy and me saved the whole playground from bad guys. Tommy and I, he corrected automatically, then smiled. Good job, superheroes. Ava flopped down next to him on the bench, her curly hair wild from playing. Tommy had returned to his mother, who was packing up their belongings. Uncle Daniel? Ava's voice grew quiet, serious in that way children sometimes get when big thoughts cross their minds. Did you have a real family when you were little like me? The question caught him off guard. Daniel set his phone down, choosing his words carefully. I had different kinds of family. There were the people who took care of me for a little while in foster homes, and then I had my adoptive parents, your grandma and grandpa now, who chose me to be their son. But what about before? Mommy said sometimes she felt alone before she had me. Ava picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. Did you feel alone too? Daniel's throat tightened. Sometimes I did. But you know what? Family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about the people who love you and take care of you. Like how you're taking care of me? Ava looked up at him with those big brown eyes that seemed to see right through him. Exactly like that. He pulled her close for a quick hug. And we're going to help your mommy too, so she can take care of you again. Promise? I promise I'll try my very best. Daniel pulled out his phone again, showing her the screen. See all this? These are places that help mommies who've had a hard time. They can help your mom get better at taking care of herself and you. Ava traced her finger over the screen. Will they make her happy again? They'll help her feel stronger and safer. Daniel watched as Tommy and his mother waved goodbye, heading toward their car. And while she's getting stronger, you and I will be right here, cheering her on. Like superheroes, Ava's face brightened. Just like superheroes. Daniel stood up, brushing off his pants. Speaking of which, I think this superhero needs some ice cream. What do you say? Ava jumped up, her earlier serious mood forgotten. Can I get sprinkles? Extra sprinkles, Daniel promised, taking her small hand in his as they walked toward the park exit. The courthouse's oak-paneled walls seemed to close in around Daniel as he sat in the witness stand. His police uniform felt unusually tight around his collar as he faced the stern-faced judge. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Celeste's face where she sat beside her public defender, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Officer Grayson," the opposing attorney began, his voice sharp and clinical, "you've only known Ms. Williams for a few weeks. How can you possibly vouch for her character?" Daniel straightened his shoulders, meeting the attorney's gaze. "I may have only known Celeste for a short time, but I've spent countless hours investigating her background. What I've found isn't just a series of mistakes. It's the story of a woman fighting against impossible odds." "Please elaborate," the judge instructed, leaning forward slightly. "Celeste grew up in the same foster care system I did," Daniel continued, his voice steady. "We're half-siblings, though we didn't know it at the time. She faced abuse, neglect, and a system that failed to prepare her for adulthood. Despite all that, she's shown remarkable strength in protecting Ava from an abusive situation." The opposing attorney paced before the witness stand. "And yet she abandoned her child at a police precinct." "She left Ava in an area where she knew she'd be safe," Daniel countered. "Where she knew I worked. That wasn't abandonment. It was a desperate attempt to protect her daughter." "Officer Grayson," the attorney's voice dripped with skepticism, "Ms. Williams has no stable employment, no permanent residence, and a history of poor decisions. How can you suggest she's fit to parent?" Daniel glanced at Celeste, seeing the tears she was fighting to hold back. "Your Honor, I've watched Celeste interact with Ava during supervised visits. The love between them is undeniable. Yes, Celeste has made mistakes, but she's also shown incredible determination to change. She's already enrolled in parenting classes and domestic violence counseling while in custody." The judge turned her attention to Celeste. "Ms. Williams, please stand." Celeste rose slowly, her hands trembling slightly. The judge studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I see before me a complex situation," the judge began. "On one hand, we have a mother who, despite her love for her child, has demonstrated concerning judgment. On the other hand, we have testimony from a respected law enforcement officer who believes in her capacity for change." The courtroom fell silent as the judge continued. "Ms. Williams, I'm ordering a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Additionally, I'm mandating your participation in parenting classes, counseling, and a job readiness program." Celeste nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. "Officer Grayson," the judge turned to Daniel, "given your unique position as both a law enforcement officer and the child's uncle, I'm granting you temporary guardianship of Ava. Ms. Williams will have supervised visitation rights with the possibility of expanded privileges based on her progress." Daniel could feel the tension leaving Celeste's shoulders even from where he sat. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was a chance for Celeste to prove herself, for Ava to maintain her connection with her mother, and for their unconventional family to heal. The opposing attorney looked displeased but remained silent as the judge laid out the specific terms of the arrangement. Celeste would need to complete her programs, maintain steady employment, and secure stable housing before the court would consider returning full custody. "This court will reconvene in 90 days to evaluate Ms. Williams's progress," the judge concluded, her gavel striking with finality. "I strongly suggest you make the most of this opportunity, Ms. Williams. Court is adjourned." The evening sun cast long shadows through Daniel's living room windows as he helped Ava arrange her colored pencils on the coffee table. She'd been quieter than usual since they'd returned from court, her small fingers moving mechanically as she sorted the colors into perfect rows. "Uncle Daniel?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel looked up from the case files he'd been pretending to review. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Are they going to take me away?" Ava's bottom lip trembled as she clutched her favorite blue pencil. The question hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He set aside his papers and moved to sit on the floor beside her. "No, honey. You're staying right here with me." Ava's eyes welled with tears. "That's what Mommy said too, but then she had to go away." Her small shoulders began to shake. "We used to live in a big building with lots of other people. Mommy would tell me stories every night even when she was really tired." Daniel gently pulled her into his lap and she curled against his chest, her tears dampening his shirt. One time, Ava continued, her voice muffled, when Mommy thought I was sleeping, I heard her crying. She was saying sorry to me over and over. She looked up at Daniel with wet eyes. She used to sing to me when I was scared. She knows all the words to You Are My Sunshine. Daniel felt his own eyes growing misty as Ava shared these precious memories of Celeste. Despite everything, it was clear how much love existed between mother and daughter. The night before, Ava's voice caught. Before she brought me to find you, she hugged me really tight. She said sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to keep their babies safe. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I miss her so much. Daniel stroked her hair, remembering the fear in Celeste's eyes at the courthouse. Your mommy loves you very much, Ava. She's working really hard to make things better. Like a superhero? Ava asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Kind of. Daniel smiled softly. Sometimes being brave means asking for help when you need it. Ava sat up straighter in his lap, her expression suddenly serious. You're like a superhero too, Uncle Daniel. You help people, and you saved me and Mommy. Daniel's heart swelled at her words. I'm not really a superhero, sweetheart. Yes, you are, Ava insisted, wrapping her small arms around his neck. You're my hero. You make the scary things not so scary anymore. Daniel hugged her tightly, amazed at how this little girl had completely transformed his life in just a few weeks. And you, Miss Ava, are the bravest person I know. She pulled back, giving him a wobbly smile. Braver than all the police officers? Much braver, he assured her, tapping her nose gently. Now, how about we draw something special for your mom? We can give it to her next time we visit. Ava's face lit up as she reached for her colored pencils. Can we draw our whole family? You and me and Mommy? That sounds perfect, Daniel replied, his throat tight with emotion as he watched Ava begin to sketch 3 figures holding hands, her tongue poking out in concentration. In that moment, Daniel realized that being a hero wasn't about wearing a badge or making arrests. Sometimes it was as simple as being there, helping a little girl feel safe enough to hope again. The counselor's office was warm and inviting, with soft light filtering through gauzy curtains. Celeste sat perched on the edge of a plush armchair, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Dr. Sarah Martinez watched her with kind eyes, her notepad balanced on her knee. Tell me about Ava, Dr. Martinez said gently. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. She's everything good in my life, the only good thing I've ever done. She reached for a tissue from the box on the side table. I thought I was protecting her by leaving, but maybe I was just running away again. Running from what, Celeste? From failing her. Celeste's voice cracked. From becoming like my own mother, from turning into everything I was afraid of. Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. You mentioned your mother. Can you tell me more about that? Celeste took a shaky breath. She left when I was 6. Just walked out one day. I spent my whole life wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough. She wiped her eyes. And then I did the same thing to Ava. But you didn't walk away, did you? Dr. Martinez pointed out. You made sure she would be safe with someone who could protect her. Daniel, Celeste whispered. I didn't even know he existed. My brother. She shook her head in disbelief. When I researched that precinct, I just knew it was in a good neighborhood. I thought maybe someone there could give her what I couldn't. Later that afternoon, Daniel arrived at the counseling center. He found Celeste sitting in the waiting room, looking drained but somehow lighter. When she saw him, she managed a small smile. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice hoarse from crying. Daniel sat beside her. How did it go? It was hard, Celeste admitted. But good, I think. Dr. Martinez, she helped me see things differently. She turned to face her brother. I want to be better, Daniel. Not just for Ava, but for myself too. I've spent so long running from everything, but I'm ready to stop. Daniel nodded, remembering his own struggles with abandonment. It takes courage to face your past. Ava gets her bravery from you, I think, Celeste said softly. Our father's side must have had some strength in them, even if we never knew them. She gets plenty from you too, Daniel replied. Her resilience, her big heart. That's all you, Celeste. Tears spilled down Celeste's cheeks. I don't deserve either of you. Everyone deserves a second chance, Daniel said firmly. You're proving that right now. Back at Daniel's house that evening, Ava sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by her art supplies. Her tongue poked out in concentration as she worked on her latest masterpiece. What are you drawing, sweetheart? Daniel asked, peeking over her shoulder. It's us, Ava declared proudly, pointing to 3 figures in the center of the page. See? That's you, and that's Mommy, and that's me in the middle. We're having a picnic in the park. Daniel's heart tightened as he studied the drawing. The figures were holding hands surrounded by flowers and a bright yellow sun. Above them, Ava had written in wobbly letters, My family. Mommy looked happier today, Ava said, reaching for a purple crayon. Her eyes weren't so sad. She's working very hard to get better, Daniel explained, sitting down beside her. I know, Ava nodded seriously. Just like when I practice my letters to get better at writing. She added a butterfly to her picture. Do you think we can have a real picnic someday? All of us together? I think that's a wonderful idea, Daniel replied, watching as Ava continued to color, filling her world with hope one crayon stroke at a time. The courtroom felt colder than Daniel remembered. He sat rigidly in his chair, watching as Celeste nervously smoothed her borrowed blazer. The opposing attorney, Mr. Peterson, strode to the center of the room with a thick folder in his hands. Your Honor, Peterson began, his voice sharp and clinical, I'd like to present new evidence regarding Ms. Thompson's history of instability. He pulled out several documents, passing copies to the judge and Daniel's attorney. These records show a pattern of erratic behavior and poor decision-making that spans nearly a decade. Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched Celeste shrink into herself. The attorney continued, spreading out photographs and documents like playing cards. Multiple addresses in the past 3 years, 4 different jobs, none lasting more than 6 months, 2 incidents of missed rent payments. Peterson's voice grew harder with each point. And most concerning, Your Honor, a history of association with known criminal elements, including her former partner, Marcus Wells, who has a record of domestic violence. Celeste's hands trembled in her lap. Daniel could see tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back, trying to maintain her composure. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, studied the documents carefully. Ms. Thompson, how do you respond to these concerns? Celeste stood on shaky legs. Your Honor, her voice cracked. I was running. Every move, every job change. I was trying to keep Ava safe from Marcus. I know it looks bad, but I was doing the best I could. The best you could? Peterson interrupted. Was abandoning your daughter at a police station the best you could do? Objection, Your Honor, Daniel's attorney called out. Badgering the witness. Sustained, the judge replied, but her expression remained troubled. She turned to Daniel. Officer Grayson, you've been Ava's temporary guardian for the past few weeks. What are your observations? Daniel stood, his police training helping him maintain a professional demeanor despite his churning emotions. Your Honor, I've seen firsthand how much Celeste loves Ava. Yes, she made mistakes, but she's working hard to correct them. She hasn't missed a single counseling session. She's actively looking for stable employment. Most importantly, Ava lights up every time she sees her mother. The judge nodded slowly, then turned back to the documents. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy and oppressive. After reviewing this new evidence, the judge finally spoke, I have serious concerns about Ms. Thompson's ability to provide a stable environment for Ava at this time. She adjusted her glasses. I'm extending Officer Grayson's temporary guardianship for an additional 3 months. Ms. Thompson, you will need to complete parenting classes in addition to your current counseling. You must also secure stable housing and employment before we revisit custody arrangements. Celeste's shoulders slumped. Daniel watched as his sister's hope seemed to drain away. After the hearing, Daniel found Celeste sitting alone on a bench outside the courthouse. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I can't do this anymore, Daniel," she whispered as he sat beside her. "Maybe Ava would be better off without me. Maybe everyone's right about me." "Hey," Daniel said firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "That's not true. You know who else everyone gave up on? Me. But my adoptive parents saw something worth fighting for. And I see that same worth in you, Celeste." She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "But all those things they said about me are in the past," Daniel finished. "You're not that person anymore. You're fighting to be better, and that matters. Ava needs both of us, her mother and her uncle. We're family, and family doesn't give up on each other." Celeste wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "Then lean on me," Daniel said softly. "That's what brothers are for." The morning sun streamed through Daniel's kitchen window as he spread paperwork across the table. Legal documents, counseling reports, and character references formed messy piles that threatened to topple over. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten as he pored over every detail that might help Celeste's case. A small hand tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Daniel, I made something for you." Daniel turned to find Ava beaming up at him, holding a piece of paper close to her chest. Her braids were slightly askew from sleep, and she wore her favorite purple pajamas with tiny stars. "What have you got there, sweetheart?" he asked, pushing the paperwork aside. Ava proudly presented her drawing. Daniel's heart caught in his throat as he took in the crayon artwork. She had drawn 3 figures holding hands, himself in his police uniform, Celeste in a bright yellow dress, and Ava in the middle connecting them both. Above the figures, in wobbly letters, she had written, "My family." "See?" Ava pointed to the details. "That's you being brave, and that's Mommy being pretty, and that's me making everyone happy." Daniel swallowed hard, running his finger over the careful crayon lines. "It's beautiful, Ava. Thank you." Later that afternoon, when Daniel picked Ava up from daycare, Ms. Sarah, her teacher, waved him over with a warm smile. Her kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she spoke. "Officer Grayson, I wanted to share something special that happened today," Ms. Sarah said, while Ava gathered her belongings. "We had a new student join us, Tommy. He was very upset and wouldn't stop crying for his mom." Daniel watched as Ava carefully packed her crayons into her backpack, humming softly to herself. "Most of the children kept their distance," Ms. Sarah continued. But Ava walked right up to him. She shared her favorite stuffed bunny and told him it was okay to miss his mommy because she misses hers too. Then she showed him how to draw happy pictures to make the sad feelings smaller. Daniel's chest tightened as he watched Ava zip up her backpack. Despite everything she'd been through, her heart remained so open, so willing to help others who were hurting. By the end of the day, Ms. Sarah said, touching Daniel's arm, Tommy was laughing and playing with the other children. Ava stayed by his side the whole time, making sure he felt included. "That's my girl," Daniel murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You know," Ms. Sarah added softly, "children often reflect the love they receive. Whatever you're doing, Officer Grayson, it's making a difference." Ava bounced over to them, her backpack nearly as big as she was. "Uncle Daniel, can we get ice cream?" Daniel knelt down to her level, straightening one of her braids. "Ms. Sarah just told me what you did for Tommy today. That was very kind of you." Ava shrugged, but her eyes sparkled. "He was sad like I was, but now he knows it gets better, just like you showed me." In that moment, looking at Ava's innocent face and remembering her drawing of their family, Daniel felt something shift inside him. All the legal documents and court hearings suddenly seemed less daunting. This wasn't just about following procedures or doing what was right. It was about preserving the pure love and hope that Ava carried in her heart. He pulled her into a gentle hug, breathing in the scent of crayons and strawberry shampoo. "Yes, sweetie, we can get ice cream. And maybe we can make a copy of your drawing to give to your mom when we visit her tomorrow?" Ava's face lit up. Can we make 2 copies, one for Mommy's room and one for your desk at work? Daniel stood in front of the rundown apartment complex, his jaw clenched. The address had taken weeks to track down, but finally, he'd found him. Marcus Wheeler, Celeste's former partner. The building's facade was crumbling, with graffiti decorating the walls and broken beer bottles littering the entrance. Taking a deep breath, Daniel knocked on apartment 3B. Heavy footsteps approached, and the door swung open to reveal a tall man with cold eyes and a day's worth of stubble. "What do you want?" Marcus growled, filling the doorframe with his imposing presence. Daniel maintained his professional demeanor, though his hand instinctively rested near his badge. "Mr. Wheeler, I'm Officer Grayson. I need to ask you some questions about Celeste Thompson." A cruel smile spread across Marcus's face. "That weak little thing? Haven't seen her since she ran off like a coward." Daniel's fingers curled into fists, but he kept his voice steady. "Care to elaborate on your relationship with her?" "Relationship?" Marcus laughed harshly. "She was nothing but trouble. Couldn't handle simple criticism, always crying about something or other. Had to teach her how to toughen up, you know?" The casual way he spoke about abuse made Daniel's stomach turn. "And by toughen up, you mean the broken ribs she sustained? The bruises?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Look, cop or not, you better watch yourself. Whatever that pathetic excuse for a mother told you." "She didn't have to tell me anything," Daniel cut in. "The hospital records speak for themselves." Across town in a sunlit counseling office, Celeste sat with her therapist, Dr. Martinez. Her hands fidgeted with a tissue as she spoke about her past for the first time. "I thought I deserved it," she whispered. "Marcus would say I was worthless, that no one else would want me. After a while, I started believing him." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her expression compassionate. "What changed?" "Ava," Celeste said, her voice growing stronger. "The first time he raised his voice at her, something inside me snapped. I realized I had to protect her, even if I couldn't protect myself." Back at Marcus's apartment, the tension grew thicker. Marcus stepped closer to Daniel, attempting to intimidate him. "You got no right coming here digging up old news." "I have every right," Daniel replied, standing his ground, "especially when it concerns the safety of a child." "That brat?" Marcus scoffed. "Another weakness of hers. Celeste couldn't even handle being a proper mother, always crying about not having enough money for food, for rent, like that was my problem." Daniel's voice turned ice cold. "No, your problem was being a coward who preyed on a vulnerable woman and her child." Marcus lunged forward, but Daniel was faster, smoothly stepping aside while maintaining his professional composure. "Careful, Mr. Wheeler. Assaulting an officer wouldn't look good on your record." In the counseling office, Celeste continued to make breakthrough after breakthrough. "I used to think love meant pain," she admitted, "but seeing how Daniel treats Ava, it's opened my eyes. She deserves that kind of love, and maybe I do too." Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. "That's a powerful realization, Celeste. How does it feel to acknowledge that?" Tears rolled down Celeste's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "It feels like hope." The morning sun filtered through the windows of Little Sprouts Daycare as Miss Sarah Thompson watched Ava help another child with a puzzle. The little girl's kindness, despite her own struggles, had touched everyone at the center. "Officer Grayson," Miss Sarah called out as Daniel arrived to pick up Ava. "Do you have a moment?" Daniel nodded, and they stepped aside while Ava gathered her things. "I've been thinking about your situation," Ms. Sarah said, her voice soft but determined. "Our daycare families want to help. Many of them have clothes, toys, even furniture they'd like to donate for Ava and eventually Celeste." Daniel's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "That's very kind, but—" "Please," Ms. Sarah interrupted gently. "Let us help. Sometimes it takes a village, you know?" Before Daniel could respond, Lisa Chen from the local newspaper approached them, notepad in hand. She'd heard about their story through the daycare grapevine and had been waiting to speak with Daniel. "Officer Grayson, I'd love to share your family's story," Lisa said. "So many people face similar challenges but feel alone. Your experience could give them hope." Daniel hesitated, looking over at Ava, who was now showing her latest drawing to her friends. "I'm not sure. It's not just about you anymore," Ms. Sarah added softly. "Think about how many other families are out there, struggling like Celeste did, afraid to ask for help." That evening, Daniel sat with Lisa in his living room while Ava played nearby. He shared their story, the unexpected meeting at the coffee shop, discovering his connection to Celeste, and the broken system that had failed both his sister and niece. "The truth is," Daniel said, watching Ava color, "we focus so much on punishing people that we forget to help them heal. Celeste needed support, not judgment. She needed resources, not handcuffs." Lisa's article appeared the following week, titled, "Beyond the Badge: An Officer's Fight for Family." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door brought over home-cooked meals. The local bookstore owner donated children's books for Ava. Even Daniel's fellow officers began sharing resources and connections to help Celeste's case. "Look, Uncle Daniel," Ava exclaimed one afternoon, pointing out the window. Their elderly neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, was setting up a small playground set in their backyard with help from other community members. "You've been so focused on helping others," Mr. Jenkins explained when Daniel stepped outside. "Let us help you for a change." The support continued to grow. Parents from the daycare organized a clothing drive. A local nonprofit reached out about housing assistance for Celeste. Ms. Sarah started a support group for single parents, inspired by Celeste's story. "I never expected this," Daniel admitted to Lisa during a follow-up interview. "When I first met Ava, I was just doing my job. But now," he watched as Ava played on her new swing set, her laughter carrying across the yard. "Now I understand that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of kindness." The community's response had created a ripple effect. Other police departments began reaching out, interested in developing better support systems for families in crisis. Local businesses offered job training programs for parents rebuilding their lives. The story had touched something deep in people's hearts, reminding them of their own capacity for compassion. The courthouse buzzed with nervous energy as people filed into the courtroom. Daniel sat rigidly in his chair, his police uniform pressed and spotless. Beside him, Celeste wrung her hands, her eyes fixed on the floor. The past few months of therapy and rehabilitation had changed her. There was a steadiness to her now that hadn't been there before. Dr. Martinez, Celeste's therapist, approached the stand first. "In my 20 years of practice," she began, her voice clear and confident, "I've rarely seen someone work as hard as Celeste to address their trauma and make meaningful changes. She's not just attending sessions. She's actively implementing everything she learns." The judge listened intently as Dr. Martinez detailed Celeste's progress, from confronting her past abuse to developing healthy coping mechanisms. "Most importantly," the therapist concluded, "she's learned to ask for help when she needs it. That's crucial for any parent." Ms. Sarah Thompson from the daycare stood next, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Ava lights up whenever she talks about her mother," she testified. "And since Officer Grayson came into their lives, I've seen such positive changes in her. She feels secure, knowing she has both of them." One by one, community members shared their experiences. Mr. Jenkins spoke about watching Daniel and Ava in their backyard, describing how their relationship had transformed his view of family. Mrs. Rodriguez testified about Celeste's dedication to rebuilding her life, mentioning how she'd been helping at the local women's shelter. When Daniel finally took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He cleared his throat, his usual confidence wavering slightly. "Your Honor," he began, "I grew up in the foster system, believing family was something that happened to other people. Then Ava walked into my life calling me Daddy, and everything changed." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Through Ava, I found my sister Celeste. And yes, she made mistakes, but who hasn't? The difference is some of us get second chances and some of us don't. Celeste deserves that chance." Daniel turned to look at his sister, tears glistening in his eyes. "I've watched her fight every single day to be better. Not just for Ava, but for herself. She's done everything asked of her and more. She's not the same person who felt she had no choice but to leave Ava at my precinct. The judge leaned forward, studying both siblings carefully. And what would you propose, Officer Grayson? Shared custody, Your Honor, Daniel replied without hesitation. Ava needs both of us. Celeste is her mother, and she loves her daughter more than anything. I'm her uncle, and I'll always be there to support them both. Together we can give Ava the stable, loving family she deserves. Celeste wiped tears from her cheeks as Daniel spoke. When it was her turn to address the court, she stood tall. I made terrible choices, she admitted, her voice trembling but determined. But leaving Ava near Daniel's precinct wasn't one of them. Somehow I knew she'd find him and he'd protect her. Now I'm asking for the chance to be the mother she deserves, with her Uncle Daniel by my side. The judge took a long moment to review his notes while the courtroom held its breath. When he finally looked up, his expression was thoughtful. This case has shown me something remarkable, he began. Not just a mother's journey to redemption, but a community coming together to support a family in need. The afternoon sun cast a gentle warmth over Jefferson Park as Daniel spread a checkered blanket across the grass. He'd picked up sandwiches from the deli around the corner, along with Ava's favorite apple juice boxes. Celeste sat cross-legged on the blanket, her hands still trembling slightly from the emotions of the morning's hearing. Can I have the peanut butter one? Ava asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Her dark curls were tied back with rainbow ribbons that matched her flowery dress, a special outfit she'd picked out herself for the celebration. Of course, sweetheart, Daniel replied, pulling out the carefully wrapped sandwich. He couldn't help but smile as he watched Ava settle between them, her small body radiating joy. Celeste reached out and straightened Ava's ribbon. You look so pretty today, baby, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Like a little princess. Mommy, watch this. Ava jumped up, twirling in her dress. Uncle Daniel taught me how to do a cartwheel. She ran a few steps away and attempted the move, landing in a giggling heap on the grass. Careful there, superhero, Daniel called out, his heart warming at the sound of her laughter. He glanced at Celeste, noticing how her eyes never left their little girl. The changes in his sister were remarkable. Her face had filled out, and there was a quiet confidence in her posture that spoke of the hard work she'd done in therapy. I never thought I'd have this, Celeste whispered, watching Ava chase a butterfly. I was so scared, Daniel. So sure I'd lost her forever. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. You did the hardest thing possible. You asked for help. That takes real courage. Ava ran back to them, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Can we feed the ducks, please? She looked between them with hopeful eyes. First finish your sandwich, Celeste said, patting the spot between them. Then we can all go together. As they ate, Ava chattered about her friends at daycare and her newest art projects. Daniel noticed how naturally Celeste responded to each story, asking questions and showing genuine interest. The fear that had once clouded her interactions with Ava was gone, replaced by a mother's quiet confidence. After lunch, they walked to the pond where Ava carefully tossed bits of bread to the ducks. Daniel stood back, watching as Celeste showed Ava how to throw the bread far enough to reach the swimming birds. His sister's gentle instructions and Ava's delighted giggles created a picture he'd never imagined possible just months ago. Later, as the afternoon began to fade, they returned to their blanket. Ava curled up between them, her small hand finding Celeste's while she leaned against Daniel's arm. The park had quieted, with only the distant sound of children playing and birds singing in the trees. Mommy, Ava's voice was soft and sleepy. Yes, baby? Are you staying with us now? Celeste met Daniel's eyes over Ava's head before answering. We're going to share you, sweetheart. Sometimes you'll be with me, and sometimes with Uncle Daniel. But we'll always be together as a family. Ava sat up, looking between them with serious eyes. We're a family now, she declared, her face breaking into a radiant smile. Daniel felt tears spring to his eyes as he watched Celeste wipe her own away. In that moment, surrounded by the peace of the park and the love of his newfound family, He understood that sometimes the best things in life come in unexpected packages. The morning handoffs became a gentle routine. Daniel would arrive at his apartment's parking lot, where Celeste waited in her newly purchased used car, a modest sedan she'd bought with her first paychecks from her job at the local grocery store. Today, like every morning, Ava's excitement filled the air as she bounced between them. "Mommy packed my lunch today," Ava announced proudly to Daniel, holding up her purple lunchbox decorated with unicorn stickers. Celeste fidgeted with her car keys. "I remembered the apple slices this time," she said quietly, "and cut them just like you showed me, without the seeds." Daniel nodded encouragingly. "You're doing great, Celeste." He noticed how his sister still second-guessed even the smallest parenting decisions, but he could see her confidence growing day by day. Later that afternoon during her therapy session, Celeste struggled to express her fears. "Sometimes I watch Daniel with her," she confided to her therapist, "and he makes it look so easy. He always knows exactly what to say, what to do." "Parenting isn't a competition," her therapist reminded her gently. "Your journey with Ava is unique." When Celeste picked Ava up from daycare that evening, her daughter's excitement was contagious. "Mommy, we have to go to Uncle Daniel's right now. I made something special." At Daniel's apartment, Ava rushed inside, pulling both adults along. The kitchen table had been transformed with construction paper placemats, each decorated with crayon drawings of their little family. Wobbly paper flowers, clearly crafted during art time at daycare, stood in an empty juice glass as a centerpiece. "Miss Sarah helped me fold the flowers," Ava explained, practically vibrating with pride, "and I picked all your favorite colors." Daniel's placemat featured police cars and what appeared to be a cape-wearing figure that might have been him. Celeste's was covered in hearts and stars, while Ava's own creation showed all three of them holding hands under a rainbow. "Yeah, I want to make dinner for us," Ava declared. "Can we make spaghetti, please?" Celeste hesitated, looking at Daniel. "I'm not much of a cook." "Then we'll learn together," Daniel said firmly, already rolling up his sleeves. "Ava can be our chef in training." What followed was a cheerful chaos of measuring pasta, stirring sauce, and managing Ava's enthusiastic attempts to help. When Celeste accidentally added too much garlic to the sauce, Daniel simply smiled and added more tomatoes to balance it out. When Ava spilled grated cheese all over the counter, Celeste surprised herself by laughing instead of panicking. "Look at us," Ava said as they finally sat down to their slightly messy but lovingly prepared meal. "We made dinner together." Daniel watched as Celeste helped Ava twirl spaghetti onto her fork, noting how his sister's hands had stopped shaking. The simple act of cooking together had done more for her confidence than hours of reassurance. "You know what?" Celeste said softly, looking around at their paper decorations and the proud faces of her family. "This is the best dinner I've ever had." "Even better than pizza?" Ava asked seriously. "Even better than pizza," Celeste confirmed, and for the first time in weeks, her smile reached her eyes completely. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand briefly, a silent acknowledgement of how far she'd come. Ava beamed at them both, sauce already somehow smeared on her cheek, and in that moment, their unconventional family felt absolutely perfect. Daniel stood on his adoptive parents' familiar porch, the same one where he'd played as a child. The wind chimes his mother loved still tinkled softly in the breeze. As Margaret opened the door, her face lit up with the same warm smile that had comforted him through countless childhood fears. "Danny," she said, pulling him into a tight hug, "we've missed you." Inside, Robert sat in his favorite armchair, newspaper folded neatly beside him. The house smelled of fresh-baked cookies, just like it always had when Daniel came home from school. "Son," Robert said, standing to embrace him, "how are our girls doing?" Daniel settled onto the worn couch, accepting a cookie from his mother. "Ava's thriving. And Celeste? She's trying so hard. Sometimes I see her watching me with Ava, like she's taking mental notes." Margaret sat beside him, her hand finding his. "You know, when we first brought you home, I was terrified of making mistakes. I used to watch other mothers at the park, convinced they all knew something I didn't." "Really?" Daniel turned to her, surprised. "But you always seemed so sure of everything." Robert chuckled. Your mother spent the first 3 months reading every parenting book she could find. She was determined to be perfect for you. We weren't perfect, Margaret admitted, squeezing Daniel's hand. But we loved you fiercely. Sometimes that's the most important thing. Daniel's throat tightened. I never knew you were uncertain. You gave me everything. Stability, love, a future. I want to do that for Ava, and help Celeste find her footing too. That's because you have a good heart, son, Robert said. We didn't give you that. You came with it. Looking around the living room, Daniel noticed the wall of family photos. There he was at various ages. Little league games, school plays, graduation. Every important moment captured and celebrated. We need more happy memories, he said suddenly. For Ava and Celeste. Something normal, fun. The next weekend, Daniel organized a trip to the local carnival. Ava's eyes grew wide at the sight of the Ferris wheel, while Celeste hung back uncertainly. Look, Mommy. Ava pointed to a ring toss game. Can we try? I'm not very good at games, Celeste admitted softly. Neither am I, Daniel said, deliberately throwing his first ring way off target. But that's what makes it fun. They took turns trying to land rings on bottles, their laughter growing with each wild throw. When Ava finally got one, jumping up and down with excitement, Celeste's face glowed with pride. At the face painting booth, Ava chose a rainbow butterfly design. Daniel noticed Celeste watching the face painter's movements intently. You should get one too, he encouraged his sister. Oh, I don't know, Celeste hesitated. Please, Mommy, Ava begged. We can match. A few minutes later, Celeste touched her cheek gently, admiring her own butterfly in a mirror. But Daniel caught her glancing at her watch, that worried look creeping back into her eyes. Hey, he said quietly while Ava was distracted by a nearby balloon artist. You're doing fine. Better than fine. I just feel like I should be doing more, Celeste whispered. You make it look so natural. Remember what Mom said about trying to be perfect? Daniel smiled. Sometimes love is enough. After the carnival, they returned to Daniel's house. Celeste sat with Ava on the living room couch, their matching butterfly face paint slightly smudged from the day's activities. Her hands trembled as she gathered her courage. Sweetheart, Celeste began softly, can we talk about something important? Ava nodded, her small hands folded in her lap. Daniel stood quietly in the doorway, giving them space but remaining close for support. I need to say I'm sorry, Celeste's voice cracked, for leaving you that day at the police station. I was scared and hurting, and I thought you'd be safer without me. Tears rolled down Celeste's cheeks, smearing the butterfly design. I made a big mistake. Not because I found Uncle Daniel, he's wonderful, but because I should have been braver. You deserved better from your mommy. Ava reached up and wiped her mother's tears with her small fingers. Don't cry, Mommy. I'm not mad anymore. You're not? Celeste whispered. Nope. Ava smiled, revealing her missing front tooth. Because now we're all together, and that makes me happy. Uncle Daniel says sometimes people make mistakes when they're scared, but that doesn't mean they're bad people. Celeste pulled Ava into a tight hug, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Daniel stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his sister's shoulder. You're doing the work, Celeste, he said firmly. I see how hard you're trying. In therapy, with Ava, everything. You're becoming the mother you always wanted to be. Celeste looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. I never thought I'd get this chance. When they arrested me, I was sure that was it. Game over. Later that evening, after Ava had gone to bed, Celeste found Daniel in the kitchen washing dishes. Thank you, she said quietly, picking up a dish towel to help dry. Not just for today, but for everything. When everyone else saw a lost cause, you saw someone worth saving. Daniel paused, water running over his hands. Maybe because I understand what it's like to wonder about your place in the world. To question if you deserve love. You gave me more than a second chance, Daniel. Celeste continued. You gave me hope, a reason to believe I could be better. For Ava, for myself. Daniel walked through the precinct doors holding Ava's small hand. Her pink backpack bounced against her shoulders with each step, filled with her art supplies and latest drawings. Officer Rachel, Ava called out, waving enthusiastically at Daniel's partner. Rachel's face lit up as she knelt to greet the little girl. Well, if it isn't my favorite artist, what have you got there? Ava proudly pulled out her latest masterpiece, a colorful drawing showing Daniel, Celeste, and herself holding hands under a bright yellow sun. It's my family, she announced, her voice carrying across the busy room. Several officers paused their work, gathering around to see. Even Sergeant Martinez, known for his stern demeanor, cracked a smile as he studied the artwork. Look at that detail, Rachel praised, pointing to the police badge Ava had carefully drawn on Daniel's uniform. You even got your uncle's badge number right. She's got talent, Martinez commented, his gruff voice softening. Maybe we should hire her to do our police sketches. Ava giggled, delighted by the attention. She moved from desk to desk, explaining her drawing to anyone who would listen. The officers, usually focused on reports and cases, found themselves drawn into her infectious enthusiasm. Remember when she first showed up here? Officer Chen whispered to Daniel. Look at her now. She's brought so much light to this place. Daniel watched as Ava charmed the entire precinct, her joy touching everyone around her. Officer Thompson, who rarely smiled, was now showing Ava how to make paper airplanes at his desk. The break room, usually filled with tired cops drinking coffee, echoed with laughter as Ava shared stories about her days with Uncle Daniel. Later that evening, after tucking Ava into bed, Daniel sat at his kitchen table. He held her drawing, studying the careful crayon strokes and the way she had drawn all three of them smiling. His finger traced over the figures, himself, Celeste, and Ava, connected by stick figure hands and love. 6 months ago, his life had been a routine of solitary patrols and quiet evenings. Now his refrigerator was covered in artwork, his spare room transformed into a little girl's sanctuary, and his heart was fuller than he'd ever imagined possible. The drawing captured everything: Celeste's growing confidence as a mother, Ava's boundless ability to love, and his own transformation from a lonely officer to a man surrounded by family. In Ava's simple crayon lines, he saw their whole story: second chances, healing, and the unexpected gift of belonging. Daniel carefully pinned the drawing to his bulletin board, right next to his badge. The contrast struck him: the cold metal of his police shield next to the warm colors of Ava's art. Both were parts of who he was now, the officer and the uncle, merged together by a little girl who had changed everything. Celeste stood at the front of the community center, her hands steady as she arranged donated clothes on the tables. 6 months of rehabilitation had changed her. There was a new strength in her posture, a quiet confidence in her movements. Need any help with those boxes? Daniel asked, carrying in another load of donations. Thanks, Celeste smiled, accepting the box. You know, sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life now, helping other families who are where I used to be. As she sorted through children's coats, a young mother approached timidly with 2 small kids. Celeste's eyes softened with understanding. Here, she said gently, let me help you find the right sizes. Daniel watched from across the room as Celeste guided the woman through the clothing options, sharing her own experiences and offering words of encouragement. Other community members moved around them, setting up food stations and organizing household supplies. Uncle Daniel, Ava called out, running up with her ever-present sketchbook. Look what I drew. He knelt down to examine her latest creation. The page was filled with bright colors, a Christmas tree with presents underneath, all 3 of them opening gifts together. On the next page, she had drawn a birthday party scene, complete with a cake and balloons. That's for Mommy's birthday next month, Ava explained, pointing to the details. See? I drew you helping me make the cake. Mrs. Rodriguez, one of the center's regular volunteers, peered over their shoulders. Such a beautiful family you have there, she said warmly. Celeste has become such an inspiration to our community members. Daniel glanced back at Celeste, who was now showing another mother how to access local resources for job training. The fear and uncertainty that had once clouded her face were gone, replaced by purpose and determination. Ava flipped to another page in her sketchbook, revealing a drawing of all three of them at a park picnic. "And this is for summer," she declared, "when we can have ice cream and play on the swings together." The simple joy in her voice touched something deep in Daniel's heart. These weren't just drawings, they were Ava's vision of their future, filled with ordinary moments made extraordinary by their presence together. Celeste joined them during her break, and Ava eagerly showed her the drawings. "Look, Mommy, I drew us all together." "These are beautiful, baby," Celeste said, her voice thick with emotion. She caught Daniel's eye, and they shared a moment of quiet understanding. This was what healing looked like, not just surviving, but building something new together. As other families moved through the community center seeking help and finding hope, Ava continued to add details to her drawings. She drew hearts around their figures, added flowers in their hands, included little details that showed how well she knew them both: Daniel's badge, Celeste's favorite earrings, the matching bracelets they all wore. Each picture was a promise, a dream of tomorrow drawn with the pure faith of a child who had seen her family overcome the impossible. And in Ava's colorful visions of their future, both Daniel and Celeste found themselves believing too. The evening sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks as Daniel, Celeste, and Ava settled on their favorite park bench. The playground was quieting down, with just a few families lingering in the golden light. "I made something special today," Ava announced, carefully pulling out her newest drawing from her backpack. Her small hands smoothed out the paper with practiced care. Daniel and Celeste leaned in closer, their shoulders touching as they examined Ava's artwork. There they were, drawn in her signature style, Daniel in his police uniform, Celeste in her favorite purple dress, and Ava in the middle, holding both their hands. Above them, in careful letters decorated with hearts and stars, were the words, "Forever Together." "See?" Ava pointed to the details she'd included. "I drew the tree where we have our picnics, and look, I even drew Shadow." She giggled, referring to the neighborhood cat that often visited them. Celeste wrapped an arm around Ava's shoulders, pulling her close. "It's perfect, baby," she whispered, her voice soft with emotion. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grass as they stood up to head home. Without hesitation, Ava slipped her small hands into both Daniel's and Celeste's, walking between them. Daniel felt the warmth of Ava's tiny fingers intertwined with his, and his heart swelled with gratitude. Just months ago, he'd been alone, convinced that solitude was his destiny. Now, watching Ava skip between them and seeing Celeste's peaceful smile, he understood how wrong he'd been. Love hadn't come to him in the way he'd expected. Instead, it had arrived in the form of a little girl with a tattered drawing and her mother's desperate act of faith. They had taught him more about family than all his years of searching ever had. Ava's laughter rang out clear and bright in the evening air as she swung between them, her joy infectious and pure. Her smile, radiant and full of trust, captured everything they had become to each other. Not just family by blood, but by choice, by love, by the daily decision to stay and build something beautiful together. If you enjoyed the story of Officer Daniel and Ava, I hand-picked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.